if you don't have a sales process that's repeatable and dialed in and a framework that actually works that you 100% believe in, it's really tough to hire a closer because one, what's going to happen is they're going to trample all over you and try to change your process and things like that. Two, if you don't have a sales process that you understand and you're trying to train a closer, well, they're simply just not going to be able to perform because you're not giving them the necessary tools. Hey, this is Nick Tam with Consulting Profits, and today I'm going to be talking about my $10 million sales framework. And this is the exact framework not only have I used to scale my businesses to multiple seven figures, but the framework that I've given to my clients where they're generating millions of dollars as well. And pardon my voice, I'm still coming off of recovering off a cold. But I wanted to get this out there because this is something that most businesses struggle with, especially if you're an agency owner, consulting business, or coach. This is the easiest way to impact your business. And most of the time, the main thing I see that people really struggle with when it comes to scaling is either their offer or their sales framework. And they both kind of go hand in hand with each other. If you have a bad offer, but a really good sales framework, you will get sales, but not to the capacity that you should be, and vice versa. So most people suck at sales and simply cannot close. This is one of the most highest leverage things you can do in your business because essentially if you double your closing ratio, you double your business, right? And then if you can't close personally, then you won't be able to hire a closer or manage a team of closers. So when I was closing my own deals, there was times where I was closing anywhere between 50 to 80%. And because I'm the founder, I'm the face of the company and things like that, obviously my closing ratio is going to be significantly higher. But if your closing ratio is like less than 20% as the founder, I'll put it into context with you. When I was closing between 50 to 80%, my best closers were closing between 35 to 45%. Okay? So there's always going to be a gap where they just won't be able to close as high as you simply because you're going to be the founder. So it's important that you have your sales process dialed in. The other thing is too, like if you don't have a sales process that's repeatable and dialed in and a framework that actually works that you 100% believe in, it's really tough to hire a closer because one, what's going to happen is they're going to trample all over you and try to change your process and things like that. And if they're a closer who doesn't have much experience, but they're trying to change your process, well, if you're spending money on ads every single day and they're changing your process and you don't have it dialed in, then you're just going to lose a ton of money. Okay. Like booked calls are not cheap. The other thing too, is that if you don't have a sales process that you understand and you're trying to train a closer, well, they're simply just not going to be able to perform because you're not giving them the necessary tools. So it's important you have your sales dialed in. And if you're closing below, I'd say a minimum of like 40% right now, you need to improve your sales process. That gives you a good benchmark to go after. If you have 10 sales calls, good quality sales calls, right? You know, you're like assuming your ads are dialed in, your offers dialed in, everything's dialed in, and really you're closing below 40%. Then you need to keep working on your sales skills, your objection handling skills, and everything like that. So that way you get to a point where you can actually scale up. Okay. So it's a very simple framework. Okay. I don't really like to complicate it. So a lot of people will give you scripts and all these things. The problem with having a script, it's good as a framework, but the problem with having a script is that it simply becomes almost like reading a textbook where when your professor's trying to teach you in university how to run this equation, right? And it's like in a perfect world where, all this is aligned and these, this is what the scenario is, you could run this equation. But it's like every sales call is different. People have different personalities. People have different tonalities. People have, some people just aren't super friendly and you have to warm up to them or you have to warm them up, right? So there's just going to be different factors that aren't taking things into equation when it just comes to a script. Like if you just read a script, you're just not going to do well. There's so much more that happens when it comes into when it goes into sales, right? So I like to think of things as a framework, because if you have a framework, you know what you need to get at every point in the process, right? So really, this is the framework I like to think about things. Their current situation. What are their problems? Why are they booking a call with you and coming to you in the first place? Okay, and what is their desired situation? So this is their dream outcome. Ideally, if they hire you, then what would they want to achieve if they hired you? Then there's going to be a gap between their current and desired situation. So the gap is essentially your solution. Okay, so if you can close the gap with your solution, and if you especially use a leveraged offer, you will be closing at 40%, okay, or more. So let's talk about the current framework, right? So I really want to understand whenever I'm hopping on a call with someone, and by the way, the worst thing you can do. So you have to think about, I guess there's two different types of sales processes, right? You're going to have one as a B2C, okay, and then one as B2B. So I guess if we were to look at those a little differently, let's put a little side note here. So B2C versus B2B, okay? So these are two very different sales processes. So if you're working with consumers, so let's say you're a coach or you're a consultant and your offer's helping like an average consumer, someone who works in a 9-to-5, they don't have a business or anything like that, right? Versus let's say like an agency owner who's like working with, roofing companies, right? Those are businesses. The sales process is very different, right? Excuse me. So let's talk about like the B2C kind of mindset that you need to have. Fundamentally, like this is the same, but the main difference between B2C versus B2B is B2C is a super emotional sale. B2B is a very logical sale. So when it comes to talking about someone's current situation, so let's say the offer is helping someone start a marketing agency, right? So that's a very B2C offer because this is a very consumer-based offer. So the questions you're going to be asked are more emotional, right? Like, how long have you wanted to leave your job? Why do you feel this way, right? Things like that. Okay, how do you feel right now being in the job that you hate? Those are the questions that you're going to be asking. Whereas B2B, it's going to be more number-based, more logical. Now, there is an emotional side to B2B, but it's not the same as B2C. The logic has to match up with the emotion when it comes to B2B. When we're talking about just straight B2C sales, it's going to be literally just emotions, right? People only care about how they feel, right? And they want to get out of a situation because of how they feel. So it doesn't have to be as logical. When it comes to buying and your solution, your offer, that has to be logical. But when we're talking about their current situation, it's going to be significantly more emotional, right? So for a B2B, sales process, the current situation, you kind of want to figure out like hard numbers. So let's say I'm talking to a roofing company. I'm going to, my goal is to sign them on as a client. Well, I want to know what type of marketing have they tried before? What were the results of the marketing? What are they currently struggling with? What is their current revenue? What are their profit margins, right? And then I'm trying to essentially pinpoint the bottleneck. Because if I know where the bottleneck is, then I know exactly if my solution is going to be a good fit or not. Because let's say like their bottleneck is, well, I just can't take on any more jobs. Well, it's like, I might be able to help with that. I'm not sure if this solution is actually going to be the right fit for you. Then we end the call. But if they're talking about, oh, I need more help with my sales process and I need more leads and opportunities, then my leveraged offer is going to be perfect for them, right? So that's what I'm trying to figure out is like, what are they currently struggling with? What are their problems, right? So from a B2B perspective, it's very logical. You know exactly what it's going to be. They give you numbers, they give you financials, they give you margins, they give you exactly what you need to kind of pinpoint and uncover that. With B2C, it's a little bit more emotional. That's where you're trying to figure out, okay, how is it that you're feeling? What's got you here, right? That type of situation. Then when we go over to their desired, so really from there, the other thing too I'll mention is I hate like fake rapport. So a lot of the time in scripts and stuff like that, you see this like long ass rapport and stuff like that. It doesn't work, especially in B2B. It's not going to move the needle. Maybe if you're like a super emotionally intelligent person, that might work. But most sales reps, believe it or not, are not that emotionally intelligent. A lot of them are like super A type and they know how to run a process. So I like to give like a framework like this, but there's nothing more than I hate than when it's like, how's your day going? Where are you from? Yada, 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 yada. Okay, so what are your problems? And it's like, they know why they're here. A real sales process, they know exactly why they're there. They're there to buy a solution. Okay, so when we book someone onto a call, they know that they're going to be sold a package to, right? That is how selling works, and that is how you want your calls to be positioned. You don't want to position it as a bait and switch. Like you don't want to position it as a free strategy session or free coaching session or whatever they're doing these days. Like if you're upfront with your customers that this is a sales process, you have a solution to their issues and their problems, they're going to respect it a lot more. And it's the same thing when you're starting a sales call and going right into their current situation. Instead of doing this whole fake rapport and things like that, I'm not saying not to be friendly, right? Like if there's something of genuine like connection, then that's awesome. Like for example, if a business owner tells me, "Hey, I love to golf. Like, do you ever golf?" I'll tell them I golf probably 3 to 5 times a week, and then we'll have a little laugh about it and get back into business. That's how like a sales process should be. So then after you kind of figure out what their current situation is, the next thing is basically figuring out their desired situation. And you're essentially not so much comparing the two, but almost like having like, here's where you're currently at and here's where you could be at, right? So it's like when you're trying to figure out what their desires are, it's the same thing. With the B2C, it's a little bit more emotional. So it's going to be figuring out what their goals are, what their dreams are, things like that. And then with B2B, very logical. It's like, how much revenue do you want to be at? How many leads do you need? What would that ideally do for your business? If you were able to scale up to this much. And then it becomes a little more emotional because let's say like for B2B, right? I'm talking to a roofer. If they say, if I'm able to double my business, then I can hire another crew and get off the job. It's like, okay, cool. Right. So if you're not on the tools anymore, and you don't have to be on job sites or anything like that, like what would that do for you? Then they're going to talk about, oh, I'd be able to go on vacation with my family, or I can spend more time with my family, or, all these things. So it becomes a little bit more emotional, but the premise and foundation of it is very logical. So with the B2B process, you want to get hard numbers. This is probably a lot more of like opposite advice that you'll hear from most people, especially like sales trainers and stuff. They always really talk about like having emotion and stuff. But this is just from my specific process and what I found works for me. Because me personally, I'm not that emotional of a person. In fact, like when people try those things on me, it annoys me. So I sell how I want to be sold to. So it's like, figure out your process and take kind of the framework and figure out what works for you. And this is how I train my sales reps is I let them kind of figure out exactly what it is that is comfortable for them. So me, I'm more facts to the point, less emotion. Some of my sales reps are in the middle, right? Depending on their personalities and things like that. And I'm totally fine with that as long as they get these 3 things. As long as they follow this framework, I don't care as much about the in-betweens. That's why I hate scripts, because they force you into a box and you might not sell like that. So imagine you have a sales rep who has the potential to be a 40% closer, but you're forcing them this 20% closing script that works, half the time for some closers and half the time not, right? So if you give them a framework, they can work with that and have their own script within the framework. So I don't care what they say as long as they're getting the right, things across, as long as they're getting the information that they need to see if we're a good fit, if our solution is a good fit, right? So that's where you want to figure out their desires and their outlining their current situation versus their desired situation. Desired situation, very straightforward. It is literally just figuring out where they want to be and how your solution would help them. Okay. Now that you have those two and you're kind of comparing the two, right? There's a gap. It's like, okay, cool. So I know you want to come from point A to point B. You don't really have a way to get there currently. So let me present a solution to you and let me tell you what we actually do and see if it might be something you're interested in. Because based on what I'm hearing, we can take you from point A to point B utilizing this, right? And then you go into your offer. And that's all it is. A sales call should be like 30 minutes from beginning to close, right? Maybe a little bit longer if there's like logistical stuff, but like collecting payment in like 30 minutes. So that way, your offer does a lot of the heavy lifting. All you need to figure out, if your offer is really good and you use a leverage consulting offer, you figure out their current situation, figure out their desired situation. Your offer should be built off what the market wants anyways, right? It should be built off exactly who your avatar is, and essentially you already know the problems that they want. You should already know the desires, right? So your solution should be a good fit for them if you've gone this far. And based on that, your offer is going to do the heavy lifting. If you have a good offer, you can put mediocre sales reps and they will still be closing at 30%, 40%. It all comes down to having a really, really good offer. So right now, using our ads, my ads, right, and the sales process for a marketing consultancy I own, we have a 10.8x ROI. And basically, we have a 10.8x ROI running this exact same system. So sometimes calls go really smoothly. Sometimes calls are a little bit more back and forth and chaotic. But overall, because it's a framework, you can start with, like, sometimes we have one of the sales reps will start with just figuring out what the desired solution or desired situation is, and then jumps to current. But the point is that if you stick within this framework and get all three things dialed in, you will still close. You don't need to have like A, B, and C. You can jump back and forth and everything within this framework. So my point is, if anything, don't use scripts, just use this framework. Okay. And basically, if you can't close at cold traffic at 25%, it's really tough to be profitable. So work on this framework and work on essentially everything in between it to get to a minimum of 20% cold traffic. So if you're at a 25% closing ratio on cold traffic and you're able to hire a team that closes at 25% and you're getting booked calls at, let's say, $200, your acquisition cost is going to be $800, right? And let's say you have even just a $5,000 offer, you're extremely profitable. And that's how you start printing money in this space. So it really comes down to the sales process. If you have a dialed in sales process and a dialed in offer, there's literally nothing stopping you from making seven figures. Literally nothing stopping you from making seven figures. The only thing that could stop you is if you actually don't know how to fulfill on your offer. Then you shouldn't have an offer if you can't actually fulfill on your offer. But other than that, there would be nothing else. So hopefully that makes sense. Let me know your thoughts if you agree or disagree with my process. And let me know if you like this type of content. And if you haven't already, please subscribe. I'm dropping as many videos as I can. My goal is to make this as valuable as most courses are out there completely for free. So hopefully this moves the needle in your business. Let me know if it does, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care.